Welter. I'm Jeff Hornstein, the president of Queen Village Neighbors Association. This is when we would normally have our QVNA general meetings on the third Thursday of the month, although we usually don't have them in July. But when PHS and the city asked to pull together a community meeting about the playground renovation, we thought this would be as good a time as any to have a meeting. See a lot of new faces in the room. Glad that folks are here. I just wanted to take 2 seconds to acknowledge the incredibly hard work of the two folks in the front row here, Duncan Spencer and Suzanne Cross, who've really been, along with Walt Lothian, who's not here tonight, been sort of the guiding force to doing the plan that got us to the point where we have a playground project put together between Councilman Squilla's office and Parks and Rec and the Water Department and Pennsylvania Horticultural and the Fairmount Park Conservancy. Am I leaving anybody out? And QVNA is very excited that our Friends of Wekico project has won a bunch of awards, and we're particularly excited to have partnered with Mother Bethel Church when we discovered, and I want to acknowledge Terry Buckalew, who's in the back of the room too. Terry's done some path-breaking research uncovering or rediscovering the history of this incredibly important burial ground, which I'm a historian by training, and for me to have learned about the existence of this site, perhaps the most important African-American burial ground in the world that's been completely forgotten, certainly the most important African-American church perhaps in the world at 6th and Lombard, and for that history to have gone completely unacknowledged for decades is a travesty, and we're all committed. QVNA and Bethel put together a working group to try and come up with appropriate memorializations within the scope of what the city will permit on that site. So we want to see this site to become part of the historical fabric of not only the African American experience and the Philadelphia experience, but sort of global history. And those are the conversations that we've been having with Reverend Tyler over the past year. Actually, we met almost exactly a year ago to start the planning for the memorialization part. So all that, I also want to acknowledge Leslie Tyler, who's done amazing work. First Lady of Mother Bethel Church. Hopefully, is Mark going to be? He's on kid duty. Mark's on kid duty. They're like Clark Kent and Superman. You never see them in the same place at the same time. Anyway, with all that being said, I welcome you all here, and I'll turn it over to the folks from PHS and the city.
Thanks, Jeff. Good evening, everyone. I'm Mark Folk. I'm First Deputy Commissioner of Philadelphia Parks and Recreation, and also the project director for the Wekico Playground Project. Thank you for joining us this evening. I want to do a very brief introduction and set the project up, and then we're going to turn it over to two presentations. Also want to introduce two colleagues of mine from Parks and Recreation, just so you know that they're here with us tonight. Stephanie Craighead in the front row is our Director of Planning, Preservation, and Property Management, and Ed Fagan, who's our Director of Stewardship at Parks and Recreation. So thank them both for coming out this evening. Jeff set up a lot of the background, but I want to step back a little bit. When Mayor Nutter came into office in his first term in 2008, he committed to saying that Philadelphia would be the greenest city in the nation. What we did at Parks and Recreation is did a plan called Green 2015, where we looked at our own facilities, rec centers, and small parks to see how we could be better stewards of our own assets and how we could literally green our recreation centers and small parks. That led us to a series of meetings with council members, and I won't ever forget, we were sitting with Councilman Squilla in his office, and as we're talking about this initiative in his district, he reached behind him on the shelf like this, pulled out the Wekico master plan and handed it to me across the table and said, "Here, we just completed this with the community, why don't you do this one?" And it was like, oh, okay, let's look at this one. We were involved in it with PHS, and by great luck and chance, it met all of our criteria. Ours, the Water Department, the Fairmount Park Conservancy. And so the project at Wekico is one of 8 that we're doing, and I'll share with you what the other ones are, but it is the first one we're doing. It's the first one out of the gate. It's the one that's the farthest along. Where we're working in the city, we're also working in Wissinoming Park up in the northeast with Councilwoman Quinona Sanchez and Councilman Heenan. We're in West Philadelphia in Carroll Park with Councilman Curtis Jones. We're in North Philadelphia at Federal Square with Council President Clark. We're in Northwest Philadelphia at Vernon Park with Councilwoman Bass. And we're in South Philadelphia at Stinger Square with Councilman Kenyatta Johnson. So those are the parks that we're working with as part of this Green 2015 initiative, and they're all about greening the parks. So these are about bringing sustainable features and making the parks more environmentally sensitive. So the master plan that you participated in as a community that came from the Community Design Collaborative had two components, one that addressed the park and one that addressed the building. I want it to be very clear tonight that the project we're talking about is the one that addresses the park. The building is a separate project. It may or may not advance. It could advance parallel track. It's a completely separate initiative. We're very interested in it as a partner with QVNA, but it's completely separate from this project. So what you're seeing tonight are all the improvements that'll come to the park because our funders are interested in green environmental initiatives. So it's a separate source of funding that we can use to address the building. Our partners, which you see up here, of course, Parks and Recreation, we're the project manager and the landowner and the land stewards. The Fairmont Park Conservancy, Jen Mahar, who you'll meet in a moment, with the Fairmont Park Conservancy, they're managing all the civic engagements, so they're managing all the public meetings, all the interactions. Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, Tammy Lee Dement and Anna Wick are here with us this evening. They have been hired, PHS has been hired to be the landscape architects who design the improvements and the project managers that make them happen. So that's PHS's role. And then the water department is with us also as a way to provide resources and greening of the sites. You'll see on this particular project, there's one particular area where we'll be managing stormwater from off-site on the site at Wekaco. So that's setting up the design. What I also wanted to address, I said there'll be two presentations tonight. The first will be PHS's presentation on the design. So you'll see what the design looks like, where we are, and then after the second presentation, we'll get comments on that. The second presentation will be by a different consultant, URS, that we have hired to do the archaeological research on the historic Mother Bethel burial ground. And I wanted to address this issue of public parks being built on top of burial grounds. This is not something that's unusual in a city as old as Philadelphia, and it's certainly not something that is unknown to us at Parks and Recreation. We have many sites we've worked on in the last 2 decades, many of them under Stephanie's leadership, and I'll just give you a few examples. Washington Square, where we made all the improvements, which is the site of the tomb of the unknown Revolutionary War soldier. We don't know exactly how many soldiers are buried in that site. Franklin Square, which we made improvements 6 years ago, which is actually the burial ground for Old First Reformed Church at 4th and Ray Street, founded in 1727. Logan Square, where we made improvements 2 years ago, and in the process of that found a potter's cemetery and had to adapt and adopt construction during the process of finding that burial ground. And I could go on, but that's to show you that we have had experience with this. We take it very seriously, very respectfully, and we know how to manage these processes and these engagements. So when we came on board, and we're aware of the prior work that had been done through PHS, we engaged URS to do the archaeological work, and we have completed what's called a Phase 1A archaeological report. That's what you'll hear about tonight. It's been submitted to the Pennsylvania Historic and Museum Commission, which is our partners. So they have received it. It's considered a draft until such time as we get their comments back. And we will be starting the additional archaeological work for Phase 1B, which you will hear about tonight, which will involve us closing the park for a week, the week of July 22nd. So you'll hear more about that at the end of the presentation about the archaeological work. So I think with that, I wanted to set up those components of it, kind of frame it out for you. You'll hear the two presentations, design, and then your archaeological work. I also wanted to acknowledge, obviously this evening, we're filming this public presentation and videotaping it just so that if you have any questions, or I just want you to be aware that obviously the session is being taped partially for our archival purposes. And with that, Jennifer, turning it over to you.
Yep.
I mean, Jennifer Mahar from the Fairmont Park Conservancy.
Yes, thank you. My name is Jennifer Mahar. I have the great pleasure of working for the Fairmont Park Conservancy and friends groups like the Friends of Wekaco all over the city. So Mark actually did a great job of covering everything, so I'll be really quick. First, I just want to thank Marty and the church for hosting us. Thank you, Marty, and Carla for setting us up. Bathrooms are through this door, should anyone need them. We also, to be nice to Marty, we have to be out of here by 9, right, Marty? Or he's going to turn off the AC and turn off the lights. So we got to be out of here by 9 o'clock. So we only have about an hour, and we have a lot to cover. Let's see. Mark kind of ran through the agenda with you. I think because URS is going to be presenting some some information following the design. I think we're going to hold questions to the end because you or us might answer some questions that you might have. So the biggest kind of component of our meeting is going to be this Q&A at the end. So try to hold your questions to the end, just so Anna can get through her presentation and Kim can get through hers, and then we'll kind of talk as a group. I think our goals here are just essentially present the information to all of you. We're so glad that people are interested in both the design and the archaeology findings, and we're just glad to have you here. So with that, Anna?
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Mark. I'm Anna Wick. I'm a landscape architect at the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society. This is a really exciting project to be involved with, and I'm just going to kind of give you a really quick overview of what we have proposed. Here you'll see the original plan that was the master plan created as part of the Community Design Collaborative. This plan broke the site into specific zones. You can see there's a wet zone, which will be a spray feature or a spray ground. They proposed new safety surface in the playground area. This is a free play zone that's very well loved, and so the idea was that that would be maintained for free play. Up here in the southwest corner, we have the natural zone, obstacle course area, resurfacing of the tennis court, and throughout the site, new plantings for shade, as well as seating elements, and that includes this new tree grove here. We took that plan and using that, made a few additions, the main one of which is the stormwater management area, which Mark touched on. With help from PWD, we will be capturing some of the stormwater runoff from Catherine Street, as well as runoff from some of the site. This will be placed adjacent to the spray ground area. The spray ground water will not be managed by the stormwater management area. That'll be managed internally. We'll be resurfacing the playground. As most of you might know, the existing surface is kind of wonky and curved like this, so we're going to try and make it more uniform and just feel a little more of a piece. We'll introduce some new seating as well as game tables down in this area. One of the things we're looking into is replacing the stainless steel slides that are very hot this time of year especially, and those will be replaced with plastic slides, and also the introduction of new trees for shade. We'll be doing some other elements related to stormwater management, some minor depaving down here, which will not only capture some stormwater, but open up some space for the tree roots for the existing London plane trees that are in this corner. We'll be introducing some natural play elements up into this corner. There's an existing mulch pile, mountain mulch. The kids really love to play. So we'll be using mulch throughout this area and introducing some boulders and some simulated logs to create a fun obstacle course. We will be resurfacing the tennis court, introducing new plantings and seating along the tennis court so you can look in both directions to watch tennis as well as watch kids play. And then we'll be holding on to this idea of the tree grove and introducing a monumental bench or series of benches, which will allow parents and other visitors to kind of have views of all different directions of the playground. So this is a view, a bird's eye view from the northeast, where you can see in a little more detail. This is the area that will be the stormwater management area. Your spray ground, which will have a simple pole, and I'll show something more about that in a moment. Some backless benches for seating. These are actually not what the playgrounds look like, but you can picture what they might actually look like. But giving them a nice uniform area of play surface will really even everything up. You can see we're keeping that free play zone area open under the London plane trees, and in this back corner you can kind of see the natural play area. Another important thing that we kept in this design is access to the building. So this gate will allow trucks and maintenance vehicles to be able to get all the way back to the rec center, which currently they are not able to do. So keeping a nice alley open there. Again, we'll be resurfacing the tennis court, doing some tree plantings along that edge. This is the natural play area. We'll be using a similar bench to what we're using around the grove in there to provide a seating space for parents to sit. We will be doing some planting along this edge back behind the rec center. and are figuring out a way to secure this area. We will have a fence across here, but not a gate. We want to keep people from using this area as a dog run, but it will allow it to feel like a separate space by having just kind of a small fence there that will match the existing fences on the site. And in this back, on the back edge, you can see some benches here and then some picnic tables that'll have game table inserts in them. So here are the site furnishings. This is, these are PPR approved benches. This is a backless version of the Do More bench, and this is a backed version. They will all be painted black. This is the picnic table, and you can see in this sketch here, this drawing, that we can do game table inserts. So we probably do 2 per picnic table, and those are really nice and can stay fixed so they won't be moved around. Around the grove, we're proposing using a monumental large piece of lumber like this. This bench is actually currently at the pop-up garden over on Broad Street, but it's we might use something probably not quite this long, but maybe a series of benches in this vein to kind of give a different feel around the grove area. This is the spray feature that we're proposing. This is called a holy post, but it's a tall single pole, and water will spray out of that in about a 20-degree radius. And this is a enviro activator, so the kids can press that button, and the water will spray for about 2.5 minutes and then stop running. So it kind of manages the amount of water that's being used on site. And it will also have a fun surface that will match the proposed playground surface. Maybe something like this, maybe something a little different. Here are some of the options we're looking into for that natural play area. These are some concrete logs, and here's some resin logs. So there's a couple different options. We're still taking field trips to go look at these things. It's pretty interesting and fun to go take a look at them. And so that will be interspersed through that area in the back with some boulders, and should make a really fun, different kind of environment than the rest of the playground for the kids to play in. So I'm going to end on this slide, but I just wanted to acknowledge that this is the extent of, the presumed extent of the burial ground. And as you can see, there are a few things that we propose that fall within this extent. Our understanding of this right now is that everything that you've seen, we will still be able to do based on what we find in the archaeology, but Kim's going to give a lot more information about what has been found, and there may be minor modifications to certain elements that happen as a result of what's found in the archaeology. So that's your playground design.
And now we have Kim Morrell from the URS Corporation, who's been one of the leads on the archaeology work.
Thanks everybody for coming, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on this topic. As you know, my name is Kimberly Morrell. I'm an archaeologist with the URS Corporation. I've been employed as an archaeologist for over 20 years now, the last 13 of which have been in the city of Philadelphia, and a very large chunk of my professional career has been spent studying historic cemeteries. So this is a topic which is near and dear to my heart. And URS has been engaged to define the extents of the Mother Bethel Cemetery, both horizontally and vertically, as it's contained within the Wekiko playground. We're looking to define the boundaries as they are historically defined and currently defined, as well as define how much fill is present in the current playground situation. Our approach to determining that has been twofold. After a review of the historic documentation of the cemetery and the development of the playground, we conducted a GPR, or a ground penetrating radar survey, across the entirety of the playground. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that tonight. And our next step is going to be to do some subterranean testing, but we'll talk a little bit more about that and the extents of that. I'm going to give you a little bit of history on the cemetery. I'm sure you're all familiar with the playground and the history, but just in general, in 1810, the Reverend Richard Allen purchased a lot on Queen Street for the purpose of a burial ground for the congregants of the Mother Bethel Cemetery, as well as individuals in the area who were destitute or couldn't otherwise afford to provide another arrangement for their burial. The parcel was only 103 feet by 121 feet. That's 121 feet on Queen Street. And as you can see, in the 1843 map, there's already a great deal of residential occupation. The development of the city has already passed this block and is on its way to the Schuylkill River. The 1849 map and the 1862 map show well-defined boundaries on the cemetery. They also show along the edges on the north and the east sides of the burial ground. There's already residential development that's well established there. Terry Buckalew has done a great deal of research on the history of the cemetery, and according to what he and we have confirmed, over 1,500 interments were documented as being in this 103 by 121 foot area. Now, that sounds like an amazing number of people, but the city cemetery is a vertical construct. The suburbs have the advantage of space. You know, they can go horizontal. In the city, though, you're extremely limited to where you're allowed to, where you have available to place your deceased. So what we've seen over and over and over again is a stacking situation, a reuse of a grave shaft. It's not necessarily indicative of a family plot. It's purely a factor of, well, not purely, sometimes it is, but usually it's a factor of space and what's convenient to use. So 2, 3, 4 individuals over time in the same grave shaft, or sometimes overlapping shafts, not at all unusual. I personally have seen up to 8 in a single grave shaft, so 1,500 people in this cemetery is not unexpected. In 1869, a couple of years after the active period of the cemetery, cemetery had sort of fallen into disrepair at that point, was not being used all that frequently. I think 1865, 4 or 5 is the last documented burial. The church leased the parcel to Barnabas Bartol for the purpose of storage. It was a 10-year lease on the provision that, and it says that the remains of the dead who are interred in the said lot of ground are to be allowed to remain there undisturbed. Mr. Bartol's intent was to use it as storage for wagons and drays. A dray is a low cart that has a heavy carrying capacity. It was only a couple of years later, though, I think it was 1872, there are articles in the Christian Reader that are already documenting that the cemetery has fallen into disrepair, headstones are broken, there's rubbish and trash all over, hogsheads and barrels are scattered across the property. So it's not being very well maintained under Mr. Bartol's watch. In 1875, the city map's still documented as church property, but in 1889, the city of Philadelphia purchases the parcel. It's their intent to turn it into a pocket playground or a small green space. And as you can see, within the space of just a few years, less than 15 years, it totally occupies the space between Lawrence and Lithgow streets. In fact, we know that it occupied that entire parcel before 1910, because between the years of 1905 or 1904 and 1905, the school garden movement occupied the Wekaco parcel. It was an effort to get children involved in the land, and although very short-lived, produced a bumper crop from what it looks like. We have records of the initial plowings and the tillings across the parcel that say that it's filled with brick rubble and very hard-packed clay. The garden was abandoned after 1905. The parcel was turned into a playground. It had already been used as a ballpark throughout after the cemetery was closed down. And during the 20th century, successive renovations of the playground, superintendent's building, the current building, we have a basketball court. I heard there was a hockey rink of some sort, volleyball courts, playground equipment, all sorts of modifications to the parcel, all of which in some measure are at least impacting the upper levels, if not the lower levels of the cemetery and the playground parcel in general. So with all this history, after reviewing what Terry had accumulated, going through what we could find as well, we decided to first start with a ground penetrating radar survey. Now the ground penetrating radar is not infallible, but it's a good place to start because it gives you an idea of what's below the ground surface. The way it operates is radar waves are produced by the wheeled sled. They penetrate the ground, in this case, to about 8 feet in depth, and bounce back when they hit a fuel tank or a utility line or a burial or something below the ground surface. The bounce rate is measured, and the computer, which is underneath his little sleeve there, takes the data, assimilates it into a visual representation of what lies below the ground based on how quickly things bounce, the waves bounce. The problem with that is that it can't tell you what they are, just that there is something underneath. This is an example of what we found across the Mother Bethel burying ground portion of the playground. We ran a 2.5-foot grid across the entirety of the playground.